Welcome to Rominger Radio. This is the first live broadcast of our Sunday evening program. We're going to be on every Sunday from 6 to 9 p.m., and we're going to be willing to take your calls. We've got a talk line number. It's 717-916-5189. Again, that's 916-5189 in the 717 area code, or you can Skype me. If you're on Facebook, you'll be able to find my Skype address. Again, 717-916-5189. Rominger Radio, your host, Karl Rominger, here to answer questions, talk with you about what's going on in the world, and figure out where politics should be. So that'll be every Sunday from 6 to 9 and every Wednesday from 7 to 9. Hopefully these hours work. If they don't, down the road, we may move them around a little bit. Reality is I pick times that don't interfere with a normal workday schedule. We also don't have traffic and weather, so you're probably not driving, so you don't need them during those hours. That made the most sense to me. You know, we're going to do 3 hours of talk radio, and as you may recall from listening to talk radio on terrestrial radio, usually to fill up those hours, people have to literally, and I say literally, fill up only 42 minutes or 44 minutes or maybe 46 minutes if you've got a station that doesn't have a lot of filler, because there's about 12 minutes of ads in every hour at a minimum, and then there's additional probably 6, 8, sometimes 10 minutes for traffic, weather, and other news breaks. And that's because most of us listen to talk radio both for information and entertainment, but also sometimes during the drive time for very practical information. In fact, I sometimes find myself driving in the middle of the day without the benefit of talk radio, and then I want to go, hey, when do I get my traffic or when do I get my weather, because I don't know where I need to be. Topics we want to talk about, pretty much anything you guys want to talk about. This is going to be a caller-driven show, so if you've got a phone, again, the number's pretty simple. It's 916-5189. Of course, I have to learn it myself, right? 717-916-5189. And we're going to be bringing your calls here live on the air. So if you want to talk about anything, you want to talk about Benghazi, you want to talk about Hillary Clinton for president, Jeb Bush for president, what your thoughts are on that. I know some people want to bring Sarah Palin back. That would be interesting to me as well, although I'm not, as you may recall, a big fan of Sarah Palin. So if somebody wants to call and defend her, I'm always happy to debate that stuff with you right now. So call now if you want, and we'll get you on the air. And, of course, it's going to take a little while to load this thing up because I'm sure people are new to this format. We're using Spreaker.com, which is like speaker with an R in it. And what does that really mean? Well, let's see. Is anybody trying to call me here? I don't know. See, I have to be my own call screener. So we're using Spreaker.com as the broadcast counsel for this. So it's going up live on the internet, and you'll be able to listen live on demand. And then later you can get it as a podcast. That Spreaker is like Spreaker, Spreaker.com. And it's a little bit different than probably what you're used to, because you can't just turn a dial and find us. If somebody who happens across the Spreaker website right now would jump on and could, in fact, talk with us. But on the other hand, if you're just kind of cruising the internet, you're probably not going to find us. So we have to build up a little bit of an audience. That's going to take a while. I'm hoping to get some of these Facebook friends of mine to call in and give us a little start off here. So if you're listening to the inaugural show here, please give us a call, 916-5189, so we can get the caller format generated here. You know, I did a legal talk show for years on WHP 580 out of Harrisburg. And on that show, we were strictly caller-driven. And what I mean by that was the callers pretty much decided what we were going to talk about. They picked the topics. I answered their legal questions. This is not a legal call-in show. This is going to be a general topic, what you want to talk about. I'm kind of interested, and I put a few topics up for discussion on Karl Rominger. That's Karl Rominger, ROMINGER.com. And what I plan to do with each show is sort of highlight topics that we should talk about or could talk about, or that I'm going to talk about whether you want to or not. And one of them is global warming, which is near and dear to my heart. A lot of people don't realize this, but besides having a degree in law, I also have extensive experience in biology and quite a bit in physics at the undergraduate level, to the point where I'm just a few credits shy of a bachelor's of science in biology with a strong background in physics. So I've always had a strong science bent and been interested in science. And the whole global warming thing has always struck me as a little strange, and always been a little off on it, because it just doesn't quite seem right to me. How can we predict the weather inaccurately in 24-hour intervals but predict the climate accurately in decade or century intervals. It just never struck me as right. And so I've spent a lot of time researching it, reading up on it. I had a brother who wanted me to watch An Inconvenient Truth from Al Gore because he thought maybe that would set me on the straight path. Somehow, get me thinking, I don't know, that global warming is real. So I've looked at it, I've read about it, and there's no doubt that there's climate change. I mean, if you look at the history of the Earth, we've cycled through, and I mean cycled through all kinds of things. If you go back millions of years, you've got periods where there's great volcanic activity, you've got periods where the weather was substantially hotter and the carbon dioxide level of the atmosphere was many times higher. I mean, many, many times higher than it is now. The Earth didn't burn up under those scenarios, and in fact, life thrived. Well, what does all that mean? Should we rejigger our economy? So one of the things that I've been looking at is global warming real? And if so, how real is it? And the question would be, how real? Well, what do I mean by that? I mean, what do you believe and what is actually happening, and are the two the same? And if so or not, what are the risks or downsides? Well, if you listen to the government, we need to immediately rework our entire economy and how we burn fuel and how we're going to live and how we're going to breathe and what we're going to eat. Cows make methane, so we need to eat less meat. We could get into diet questions here in a minute because there was a great blog entry on the Wall Street Journal the other day about how all the dietary advice the government has been giving us is all screwed up for years. So go figure. That's kind of where I'm heading with climate change. But here's the deal. Is it real? Well, the answer is we've got to know how real it is and how significant it is. That is man's portion of climate change before we decide to rejigger our entire economy. What does that mean exactly? Well, that means before you spend $1 trillion reworking how Western civilization has been created and the fossil fuels we burn, does what we do really drive global warming? So one of the statistics that you'll see cited is 97% of scientists believe in global warming. Okay, great. And when you ask scientists questions, it reminds me of asking doctors questions. They're kind of to the point. So, Mr. Scientist, is there global warming? Well, yes, there is global warming. Okay, well, what do you mean by that? Well, there is global warming. Okay. What do you mean by that? Well, I believe that the average surface temperature of the Earth is rising based on the data sets that we have. Okay. Do you believe that that's caused by man? Well, I believe man is a significant cause. And actually, that 97% falls to about 88% in the various studies when they ask, what's the cause and what's a significant cause. And the scientists say man is a significant cause of climate change. Now, one of the examples I gave in an article I posted the other day about global warming is nail guns are a significant source of injury in the United States. In fact, let's take a look at this here. I have the exact number because I looked this up. Nail guns cause 37,000 people a year to go to an emergency room. So in 2012, it was 37,000 people with nail gun injuries showed up in hospitals around the country. Now, if you do the math on that, how many people a day is that? Well, 30,000, is it 10 a day, I guess, 365 days in the year. So about 10 times a day, somebody shows up in the ER with a nail gun injury. It's significant. And nail guns are a significant source of accidental injury. It also turns out, however, that the emergency room visits total 129.8 million in 2012. So for every time some guy showed up with a nail gun injury, 3,513 other people showed up at the emergency room with some other injury. So to say something is a significant cause or a significant source of something doesn't necessarily mean it's the greatest cause or the largest cause or a very large cause. Now, the United Nations has said dominant cause, okay? And in that regard, the United Nations has said in their reports that anthropogenic warming is the, I think the term they use, dominant cause of global warming or climate change. Well, dominant cause is a legal term, and it comes from insurance law, and it has to do with what cause amongst many are we going to assign the blame to. Now, in the strictest sense, dominant cause is a legal determination or proximate cause style determination where we could use a but-for test, and there might be 100 things, but for the fact that Adam and Eve were created by God, I wouldn't exist. But for the fact that Adam and Eve were created by God, I wouldn't have missed the stop sign and run into your car. So the but-for test goes all the way back to the beginning of time. So when you have more than one but-for as the immediate cause of something, we then look at what is the dominant cause for deciding which insurance contract or whether insurance coverage has to be paid. That's kind of where this term comes from. Well, in science, as in law, dominant cause can really be one of many, many causes. So, for instance, if you have 100 causes, and they're all equal causes, they'd all be 1%. There'd be no dominant cause. There'd be 100 equal causes. Well, in the law, we'd still allow for the picking of a dominant clause because we would say policy considerations creep into it. We'll talk about that in a second. Policy considerations. Maybe that's what the UN is considering. But on the other hand, if something's 2% and everybody else is 1% except for, there's 99 causes and one's 2% and the other ones are all 1%, the dominant cause is the 2% cause, because it's the greatest amongst the many. Well, when the United Nations tells us that man is the dominant cause of global warming, what they're basically saying, and essentially saying to you and I, is that we are the number one greatest cause of global warming, and as a result, we need to do something about it. What they're not telling us, because if you're going to say we're the dominant cause, then you must have some relative percentages to break down and to explore. Well, how is that going to work? Well, what they're going to do is figure out what it is, what's greatest, what's least. So they should be able to assign percentages to it. What am I saying by that? I'm saying if you're going to tell me something's a dominant cause, you should be able to tell me how relatively, what order of magnitude or what percentage or what fraction of all the possible causes it is. So if anthropogenic, man-made warming of the climate is 85% man's fault, then maybe there's an argument that we need to do something drastic. On the other hand, if it's 5% of the change, or even if it's 30% of the change or the cause of the change, but then we figure out that even if we stop doing what we're doing, it's not going to meaningfully change the outcome. In other words, the climate's still going to warm or cool or do whatever climates do, because that's part of the problem. We don't know what climates do. But let's assume that it's going to go ahead and go up a few degrees. But if we change our entire economy around, it's only going to go up 2.8 degrees instead of 2.9 degrees. Well, maybe it's not worth the cost then to rejigger the entire economy. And that begs the question, why would the politicians, why would the government come to us and stick us like this, I mean, what's the story here? And what do they mean, we need to do this right away? Well, one possible reason is it's all about something else. And Michael Crichton wrote a book called State of Fear a number of years ago. And if you read the book, and I'm going to give you a little spoiler alert here because I'm going to talk a little bit about the book. And like I say, it's a spoiler alert. In the book, he explains... I'm just looking, by the way, on Facebook here at the call now that I put up with the talk line number. I got 2 likes on it, but they didn't call. All right. So hey, I like the fact you put your phone number up there, but I'm not going to call in. We're just trying to get this Skype thing worked out. I'm going to be just so you know, I'm going to be screening the calls right now. So once we get this thing warmed up and worked out, we'll actually get a call screener on it so that as the calls come in, they can screen them, tell me what they want to talk about, and kind of fit people in a logical order. I'm going to give you some inside baseball on how talk radio works a little later. But anyhow, back to Michael Crichton. Oh, by the way, this is we're about 15 minutes right now, and this is where on normal talk radio I would get a break to collect my thoughts, review my materials, sip a little soda, and move forward. So we're going to have to, at some point, figure out how I take a break during this 3-hour period. My proposal is going to be perhaps to chop the show up a little bit here into a couple segments, and that way I'll go off the air for a few minutes, reload a second segment, go back to live broadcasting. So I think that's what we'll try it at 7 o'clock, signing off and signing back on with a little break in between. So I think we'll go to 6:55, sign off for the moment, and then fire back up at 7 o'clock. We'll see how that works. So like I say, which is all brand new. We're experimenting. If you got suggestions, 916-5189. If you can hear this broadcast, 717-916-5189. I'm just watching the Facebook feed here. Now, this show is also going to be integrated. I'm going to come back here and talk about Michael Crichton's State of Fear here in a second. But just so you understand, I've integrated Facebook, Twitter, with KarlRominger.com as well as the Spreaker site. So everything is going to be, go to the hub. The hub is basically going to be KarlRominger.com. That way you'll be able to keep up on the schedule, look at the show topics. We're going to schedule guests. We're really going to get this thing rolling as time goes on. But like I say, it takes a while to figure this out, and it takes a while to build your audience. I remember when I started at WHP with the Legal Call-In show, the call volume built up over the years, and I thought the show really gets better after people get familiar with the host and they get confident about calling. And that's I'll remind you, even if you're not comfortable calling, or you say, oh, I've never called into a radio show before, it's a big deal, but it's not really a big deal. What I mean it's a big deal is it's a little scary sometimes. So if you're not used to public speaking and you're not used to just talking away like I am. So 916-5189, I guess that's 717-916-5189. Of course, a prize to anybody who can tell me why our number is 5189. Some people may know that 5189 means something. Some people may not. So there's a little trivia hunt for some of you out there. I'm wondering if anybody will come up with it. It can't be that hard. And I've actually laid an Easter egg somewhere which will help you find it, but who knows? Who knows? Okay, so anyhow, in State of Fear, he basically went out and was going to write a book about global warming and how man is allowing the earth to warm up and what a bunch of horrible schleps we are. Because if you know Michael Crichton's work, a lot of it's about man's hubris in science. And so even though there's a lot of science fiction in there, and there's a lot of fictional things going on throughout many of his books, Andromeda Strain and Congo and, Timeline and a gazillion other ones, he... I got somebody guessing on it. Now, John, that's not right, but you are listening. That shows you're listening. But you could call. Try calling the number. I mean, see what happens. Get on the show here. I want to know if it works, because I'm just looking at my Skype feed on laptop number 2, and I got to tell you guys how this setup works here at some point too, because it's interesting. I've sort of jerry-rigged this whole thing together. I've actually bought a little soundboard, and I can do neat things like put a little echo in. Oh, I got a caller. Okay, enough of the echo. All right, caller, you're on the air.
I have a guest. This is Lucinda. How are you?
Yeah, Lucinda, how are you?
I'm doing good.
I'm like, please call somebody, anybody call. Can you hear me okay? That's a big question.
A little bit. It's kind of choppy.
Kind of choppy? Well, you know what? I got an internet feed going up, and I got the Skype coming in, so I hope this all works right.
Yeah. Sorry, it is a little choppy. I can make out most of it.
Gotcha. Does the show sound okay, or is it just with the Skype right now that's choppy?
No, the show sounds fine. I was listening to it on my earphones, and no, that sounds fine.
I got this little mixing board. I bought it used off a disc jockey down in Lancaster for a whopping $75 to make this whole thing work. And then I got 2 laptops plugged in. I got a microphone plugged in with what they call a puff screen on there, so your buzz and your puzz. You know when you see the person singing the video and they got a little screen over the microphone.
Hey, Karl.
Yeah.
It's really hard to hear. I'm so sorry. It's like really, really choppy. I can hear like every third word.
We're gonna have to figure out the Skype connection, I think.
Oh, that was a little better.
Yeah.
What happened there?
Skype is spotty to start with.
Yeah.
What I might do, and I think I may use the Skype connection on my cell phone. That way it goes through a different internet connection, so that might make a difference too, because Skype might be just trying to sneak in the bandwidth here. I don't know. But what do you want to talk about?
Well, I actually went on Google and tried to look up the 5189 number.
Okay, 5189. 5189 is actually, it sounds like Chinese. And so in China, a lot of websites use numbers as their domain name, and they like certain numbers over there. So 518 sounds like I want prosperity. 5189 sounds like I want prosperity for a long time. So,
oh, okay, all right, I like that. It's better than what I had. So
yeah. Now, and here's a really ironic one. A very sought after number in China for websites and phone numbers and license plates is 666. Because it's a connotate, because it sounds like Chinese for easy or smooth life, which obviously in Western culture has a very different meaning.
Yeah, I think maybe you want to stay away from that exercise. Well, you never know. Might get some interesting calls.
Yeah, well, and we had I looked at variations of 911 too, but yeah. I found the 5189, and it's funny because when you're trying to pick numbers, I have done that before where you're doing a radio show and they have a number and the number doesn't roll off your tongue. So like, WHP 580 has a number that mimics the it's a 0580, mimics the call numbers of the station or the frequency. Here it didn't really matter, but I wanted to come up with a number that at least flowed, and then I think 5189 flows pretty well. So
yeah, I like it.
Yeah,
that's
so
good.
916-5189, it flows off the tongue. You can try different numbers. I was sitting around literally, so Skype gives you all these numbers you can choose from, and I was like saying them out loud, and if you'd heard me, you'd have thought I was an idiot, but I was trying them to see how they flow. Because you do get 518.
I could do that.
It flows. It just flows well enough. If you try to do like 9060950, it just doesn't have the same quick 916-5189.
5189. Yeah, I definitely hear that now for sure, and I know what you're talking about. It's rolling off the tongue. And it's really funny, when I looked up the number, I was just trying to see what you were looking at, and the first thing on Google says Chinese lucky numbers, and I just kind of went by that because I didn't think it had anything to do with it.
Yes, it is a Chinese lucky number, so that's...
I want prosperity, it says right there.
So I thought, it's always fun to build these things in. Now, I'm no J.J. Abrams, okay? If you pay attention to his movies, he builds endless references back to other things he's done, and he has all these little things like Slusho, this drink that characters drink in the various shows that you'll see him drinking out of cups that doesn't really exist. I mean, we're not quite at that level yet, but you got to start somewhere. So we build, so we build that in. Well, it's good. It's good to know that Skype's working well enough that we can have a conversation. And I do apologize if I'm kind of like not saying, but I'm just really concentrated on hearing you. Gotcha. And if we can get someone, else to try a 916-5189, we'll get them on here. Anything else you want to talk about? Anything you want to point out that's wrong with the world? If you can think of anything. I don't want it to show. No, I'm just kidding. Is your mom going to be on? I love her recipes. You know what? I don't know yet. I tried to call her earlier, and then she just tried to call me about 2 minutes after the show started, and I wanted to punch her through the phone and be like, come on, Mom. Come on. You don't know my show's on right now? She'll call. She's always good. I like her. And it's Mother's Day, so you got to have her on. Yeah, I thought we'd try to get her on here and see what she says. Now, what do you think about the idea of breaking during the hours? Like, in other words, like at 6:55, we'll go off the air and we'll come back on at 7:02. You think that's fair or will work? It's fair to you, of course. Yeah, I think you probably need some type of break at some point. I mean, as a listener, you're always trying to get out of the commercials, so we have like Netflix and all that kind of stuff. But you have to have a minute to breathe, I would think, or go to the bathroom or something. I don't know. Yeah, I've got actually a jug here handy just in case. I'm just kidding. That's very convenient. Right, absolutely. Now, if you saw this outfit I have here, I have two laptops on my coffee table, and I pulled another little end table over and put the soundboard on the microphone because when I was testing all this gear out and putting it together, I didn't want to invest in a space to put it in yet, nor am I exactly sure what kind of space I want to put it in. I know I need a high-speed internet connection, and I know I need a few other things, but basically I'm just sitting on the sofa relaxing right now talking to you. But hopefully, if you're listening to the show, you're getting a nice, smooth experience here. And I was going to talk about I'm going to talk about Michael Crichton's book. So he, in State of Fear, has this concept where he went out and he decided he was going to write about man's destruction of the environment and how global warming is a crisis. And he does what he did, which is research the topic before he goes and writes a lot about it. And much to his surprise, completely to his surprise, in fact, he discovers that, we are, in fact, not warming at all. And in the book, he lays out a lot of that information, but then he creates a fictional story which describes what happens and helps us understand what's going on in reality. And when you read that book, you come to conclude that there's probably no such thing as global warming or climate change, at least man-made. And Crichton then, of course, spent a lot of time trying to figure out why are people doing this, and that's why he named the book State of Fear. Without a impending nuclear war, remember there was going to be a nuclear war, Russia was going to blow up the United States, the United States was going to blow up Russia, Europe was going to get trampled, the whole world was going to conflagrate. Well, after the Cold War was over, the next newest bugaboo was global warming. We'll tell the people that there's an impending disaster, an impending crisis, which is going to forever alter the way we live and how we feel and how we breathe and what we can do and what we need to do and all those sorts of things. And, well, what happened? Well, we spur everybody to action, and this is how we get people to change their economies. And in the meantime, of course, all the vested political interests begin to graft onto this. So his book sort of lays out the beginnings of that. I have a quote. If you go to KarlRominger.com and you click on the global warming piece that I wrote, I have a quote from Ottmar Edenhofer on there, who you probably may have heard about this before, but he was in the IPCC's Working Group 3, which was the lead author of the IPCC's fourth assessment report released in 2007 about global warming for the United Nations. And in 2010, this is his quote: "First of all, developed countries have basically expropriated the atmosphere of the world community. But one must say clearly that we redistribute de facto the world's wealth by climate policy." And it goes on here, but the next key phrase is, "One has to free oneself from the illusion that international climate policy is environmental policy. This has almost nothing to do with environmental policy anymore, with problems such as deforestation or the ozone hole." What he was basically saying and admitting was, we're not really writing the global warming policies anymore for environmental purposes. We're writing them for social and cultural purposes to justify wealth redistribution. So here's the plan. The plan is to get everybody to sign on to agree to sell carbon credits, and every country is going to get carbon credits. Some countries, such as Africa, aren't going to need their carbon credits, so they're going to sell them to the Western nations. So when this is all done, it becomes a giant wealth redistribution scheme with the Western world paying large sums of money to buy carbon credits off of other countries who are never going to use their carbon credits that they're allocated in the original system to transfer the wealth. So that's kind of the policy or the plan. And again, this was one of the guys who was behind one of the reports for the UN, speaking freely on German TV. Probably got smacked down later and got a good talking to. "Ottmar, what were you saying? You can't say what happens in the castle stays in the castle. Read your Machiavelli." Read your Machiavelli. Well, yes, that's right. And so what Crichton was trying to say was, that's the idea. Create something to be afraid of. And, the best beast, Hitler used the Jews, right? The Zionist, the evil Jew. And the explanation would be always nebulous. They're responsible for all the world's problems. They create all the world's problems. Well, that's the thing with climate change now. It creates all the world's problems. And so now every tornado, could it have been climate change? Every flood, could it have been climate change? A crop fails somewhere. It's climate change. The earth cools. Oh, that's part of global warming. That's why we now call it climate change. Actually, if you look at the history of the numbers, we're actually in a trend right now where warming has leveled off, and we haven't had any warming in a while. And actually, 2010 through 2013 were slightly cooler on average than 2000 through 2009 in the United States. And people say we have a pause in warming since the late 1990s globally. So what does all this mean? Well, of course, there's now the polar vortex. That's climate change. And now they're using the term climate disruption. Every day somewhere a car chase goes on and the police go on car chases and you never see them on TV until Fox News has made fun of, I'm trying to remember my newscaster with the movie that they did, but basically every car chase now becomes, breaking news. And so if they've got a helicopter on it, it can become national news. Well, it's the same thing. Houses burn down every day. People drown every day. People disappear every day. NBA owners say stupid, racially motivated things probably every day. But when the news catches. Well, nowadays, whenever there's a traumatic weather event like an avalanche, a tornado, all the things that have been happening for the last, 10 million years, it becomes somehow linked to climate change, climate disruption. One of the other points that is often made, by people who are opposed to anthropogenic warming and believe we must do everything in our possibility to end it is, what are they going to do when the next ice age comes? Because if you really follow the history of the world, we go through these ice age cycles and we get ice ages back again and again and again throughout time. So if you follow the geological record and what the scientists say, the same scientists who talk about climate change, some of them, they tell us that there's going to be these huge spikes in cold and hot that naturally cycle through. And they tell us that, a couple million years ago, carbon dioxide was a lot more. Some million years ago, it was less. Other times, actually, a few billion years ago, there was no oxygen in the atmosphere. But the long and short of it is, what are we going to do when the next ice age comes? I mean, the same people who are morally crusading against man intervening or causing any change in the climate, will it be okay to cause some warming if the next ice age is about to occur and we can prevent that by, releasing methane and CO2 in mass quantities and terraforming the earth to prevent an ice age? If that, ice age, by the way, will put everybody that, is listening to this show under ice. If you're, New York City and north, if you're in the middle of Europe and north, if you're anywhere in the northern hemisphere, pretty much, probably all the way down to Virginia might be under ice, and certainly the rest of the country would be very cold and snowy, and the rest of the globe in the northern hemisphere very cold and very snowy, and people would freeze to death all over the place and starve to death because the breadbasket of the United States would be essentially locked out. So would we be moral? Would we be just to go ahead and prevent global cooling by interfering with the atmosphere? Because under the current regime, we're being told that it's wrong for us to alter our environment in any way. And one of the things I was pointing out on Facebook the other day, and I kind of did this as a prelude to this, is the honeybee. There are no such thing as honeybees in North America prior to the arrival of Westerners. When the settlers came over, they brought their bees along. The Native Americans used to call them English flies. The honeybee was called the English fly because before that, they had no honeybees. Well, honeybees completely wrecked the ecosystem here. What they did was pick plants that don't self-pollinate or need help and made them much more successful. And many European crops, many European plants required pollination. Self-pollinators, which were the majority of the plants in the Americas at the time, took a nosedive. The other thing they brought with them was earthworms. And believe it or not, in the northern reaches of North America, and when I say northern reaches, Virginia and north, there were no earthworms because the last glacier had killed off all the earthworms. And so the forest, the base of the forest litter was completely different. But bringing over the earthworms has changed the forest. And so now this pristine nature that people would want us to return to, which is to let the forest go and to save the honeybees from colony collapse. And, these are imperatives people would tell us to, protect against man's intervention. Well, actually, the modern deciduous forest as it exists today is a creation of man completely, because how we manage the forest, what's happened to the soils of the forest, and even what the Indians or Native Americans, as you prefer to call them, did before the arrival of the colonists was select which trees to cut down. So magically they didn't cut down chestnut trees because American chestnut was quite edible, and as a result, they were way overrepresented in deciduous forest, even at the time the settlers arrived. So the condition of the forest wasn't even natural then. I want to go to South America here in a second. But long story short, the bumblebee might be native, but the honeybee is not. And the honeybee, this very competitive and very effective pollinator that's now necessary for all of our food crops, if we're all about returning to how nature is and what nature should be and protecting ecosystems, we should remove the invasive species of the earthworm and the honeybee. Now, in Latin America, another interesting thing's happening. They keep clearing rainforest. You know what they keep discovering under the cleared rainforest? Settlements, former agricultural fields, mounds made of shards of pottery, and we're talking about giant mounds. Basically, it appears that the rainforest wasn't even there that long ago. But remember, we've been told that the rainforest is essential for the world's health and that the world can't survive without the rainforest. I'm not saying we should cut down all the rainforest. I don't know if we can or we can't. But what is apparent is that the rainforest was not always there. And in fact, it wasn't there during man's existence and at the times that man was actively creating culture and actively creating civilizations throughout South America and Latin America. So for people to say, you know, this is the way it must be. Remember, we have to save the rainforest, we have to save the rainbows, we have to save the unicorns. Oh, my goodness. It makes me wonder, you know, what really is real. So let's talk about this. So now, you know, I know this wonderful woman, and she Facebook posts me, basically says, how can you possibly think that global warming is not real and that we need to do something right away? And I understand her concern because she's living in a state of fear. She's been conditioned to believe that scientists don't question global warming and that politicians shouldn't question global warming. So go back and read my article on KarlRominger.com so you can understand maybe exactly where I'm going with this. By the way, the talk line number, what is the talk line number? Well, 5189. We want to do, and of course not just 5189, but oh my goodness, I'm looking for the first three digits of it because of course I don't have it memorized yet. 717-916-5189. There we go. 717-916-5189. If you want to call in and join in the discussion, because if any of you guys have any thoughts about global warming or you want to prove me wrong that there is such a thing and that we need to be scared out of our bejeebers about it, I'm happy to take you on. I don't really think anybody's going to call in because you guys are probably a pretty smart audience and you realize this. But anyhow, this nice young woman, she's a scholar too, so it's sad to see her fooled into believing that global warming is an absolute reality. But this reason is because you're led to believe, and when I say led to believe, a reasonably intelligent person who isn't on notice or isn't realizing that this is a fake or false science being used to rework the global economy and to redistribute wealth by the progressives, isn't going to immediately recognize that because of the way it's presented in the media, because of the way it's presented in public and public forums. It's basically, without a doubt, and I say this, without a doubt, insidious. They're just saying now school children are being indoctrinated. Well, school children have been indoctrinated forever. I can remember when I was a kid, PETA was sending stuff out, and we were getting stuff about, clubbing baby seals. But the police indoctrinate kids, too. They send Officer Friendly to school to talk about how cooperating with the police is a great idea. Government's all about indoctrination. Well, what our government's been doing is trying to indoctrinate the populace into believing, and successfully, that you can't question global warming because you're like a flat earther or a birther, worse. And, of course, who wants to be compared to a birther? Because we all know Obama was born in the United States. Nonetheless, global warming is one of those issues where, again, a very reasonably intelligent person, unless they really dig into it, isn't going to realize that. It's being foisted on you. But when you start to look at the science of it, and you start to look at the level of certainty that they talk about it, dominant cause, probable cause, reasonable cause, actual cause, dominant, significant cause, the terminologies. When you realize that the terminologies are such that when scientists are asked these questions, they're not really being asked, do you think it's the end of the world as we know it, at the quote REM. So they're going to answer it honestly, and they're going to say, yeah, I think that there is climate change, and I think that man is a factor in climate change. It's the rest of it that gets cooked, no pun intended. And so my thought is that it's important for us to question it. So my challenge is, and I say my challenge is, I really want people to go out and look up and say, hey, what's really going on out there, you know? And I think I said we need to know whether we're a meaningful cause and whether we need to do anything, because those are separate questions. We need to demand an explanation of what percentage of a cause we are and how certain the science actually is. Those questions aren't going to be answered, and they're not going to be answered well. And I want to analogize that back to what they're now discovering about fatty foods. We all know, right? We all know that fatty foods are bad for you. Fatty foods are going to kill you. You cannot eat steak. Eggs are full of cholesterol. Whole milk is bad for you. You need to remove the saturated fats from your diet to prevent heart disease. Well, it turns out that the history of that was in the 1950s. There was a heart disease epidemic going on in the United States, and they decided that that was the cause of it. And some studies were done, which all turned out later to be questionable at best, and now we know to be completely questionable. That people still are told to continue to move towards margarine and other trans fats, which we now know were the real culprits, and also to sugar and carbohydrates, because human beings tend to regulate themselves. You know, little kids are good like this. If you have a son or a daughter, you probably notice some days they eat a ton, some days they eat a little, some days they eat none. That's because they eat based on their body's needs. They don't have it's 5 o'clock in the evening, therefore I must eat a steak. Or I've been eating dinner every night at 7 p.m. for 20 years, therefore I'm going to shovel it down at 7 p.m. because it's dinner time. No, their bodies are a little more in tune. Just like animals are very good at regulating themselves, of course, except for dogs when you feed them the table scraps. But, you know, there's always some counter argument to something. But here's my point. They are pretty good at regulating their own diets and their own desire for calories. So when you remove fat calories from a diet, they're dense calories. You don't have to eat as much to get fat calories, but you have to eat more carbohydrates to get the same number of calories, because what is there, 4 calories per gram of carbohydrate and 9 per fat or something? I forget the exact ratios, but nonetheless, there's more calories in a gram of fat than there is in gram of carbohydrates. Well, people start eating trans fats and they start eating more carbohydrates. And as late as just about 10 or 15 years ago, there's still literature being put out, for instance, by the American Heart Association telling people that in order to, you know, when you get a craving for something fatty, instead eat a gumdrop. That's actual, advice. Eat a gumdrop because we're not worried about the diabetes or the effect on your insulin. Now we realize that even complex carbohydrates aren't ideal in the human diet in large quantities. You can work your way into diabetes with bran muffins, essentially, if you eat too many of them. And so huge carb exposures are actually worse for you, combined with the trans fats. So it looks like we now need to move back towards eating, to make Michael Pollard happy here, is whole foods, the slow cook natural foods, things with 5 ingredients. So a stick of butter, some duck eggs, fried up in a pan. That's actually good for you. To eat the frosted flakes in the skim milk is not so good for you. So I will eat my duck eggs and my butter while you eat your frosted flakes and your skim milk, or maybe you eat somewhere in between. I know I sometimes eat pancakes with maple syrup on them. That's probably not the greatest either. Point is, though, we were told for 20, 25 years, 30 years, was it 30 years, maybe 40 years, all my life, it was just a given, right? You don't eat that saturated fat. Don't eat the fat off your steak. Don't put real butter on your bread, because these things will kill you, and this is settled science. This is settled science. Well, does it sound familiar? Global warming, settled science. It's done. It's over. Why is anybody questioning it whatsoever? Well, you know what? I'm going to continue to question it and continue to question it and continue to question it until I get good answers. And actually, that's what scientists do. So if a scientist were to say it's settled science, nothing's settled science. You know, even Euclidean geometry had to get updated at some point. And and even Newtonian physics had to be updated at some point. And even relativity, you know, Einstein didn't like certain features of quantum physics. Those things are always subject to revision because nothing is settled in science. It's just a question of what model works best and what we really understand. And when it comes to global warming, I am convinced that the politics have taken over and that what you and I are being told is not what the scientists would tell us, not what the science would say, not what's talked about in closed rooms. And these people depend on the government. You know, you realize that the federal government, we like to make fun of the federal government spending, but amazingly, we spend about 2% of our entire budget on medical and scientific research, just research. This isn't military money. This isn't anything. This is just straight up Congress allocates 2% of the federal budget for medical and scientific research every year. That's a noble and great thing. But it also means the money comes from a master. And the master wants global warming. The master wants politics. That 2% of our federal budget that we give to medical and scientific spending influences the grants. It influences how you're going to get money. I was told years ago when cancer became the target, and you might remember there's some place, for instance, the Roswell Cancer Institute in Buffalo, New York. When it was founded, it was said, you know, give me $100,000 and we'll cure cancer. Well, that hasn't happened yet. But for many, many years, if you wanted a grant in the medical research line, a sure winner was to ask for money to study cancer. And then after AIDS came out and the politics changed and the hijacking of the, some people would argue, of the system of grants and funding by AIDS advocates, it became every grant, no matter what you actually wanted to study, as long as you could explain how it might help cure AIDS, you were much more likely to get federal money. Well, what do we have now? What kind of money are you going to get if you say, I'm going to do climate science and question global warming? You're not going to get anything. If you say, I'm going to do a study which will help show that global warming can destroy the nutritious value of crops, you might get a grant. Point is, the political masters control this. And so every scientist doesn't want to have his or her grant source cut off. And, you know, scientists work for, well, what is a scientist? Well, scientists work for two places, industry and academia usually, right? And academics make their money teaching, but they have to publish or perish, they like to say. And in order to publish, you need to do studies. In order to do studies, you need money. Where do you get money? Well, you get money from grants. And so, again, having spent some time in the science side of things in undergraduate and having spent some time as a teaching assistant and having some experience working for something called Project Kaleidoscope, which had to do with teaching science at liberal arts universities, I happen to know for a fact that large amounts of money flow into the science departments from grants. And a lot of the grants come from the National Institute of Health, and they come from the National Oceanic Society, and they come from NOAA, and they come from all the different government-run areas outside the military grants. And so what are you going to do when you do your study? Are you going to conclude or going to try to publish something that says that the glaciers aren't melting? Well, if you do that, you're going to get humdrummed and risk not getting your money. And this may sound paranoid, but that's really how it works in the real world. And so everybody sort of agrees that the emperor has no clothes, or that I guess he has clothes even though he has no clothes. And so no one wants to be the first one to say the emperor's naked. Well, I'll stand up right now and say the emperor's naked. I'll probably get my head lopped off at some point. But here's the point. Global warming is probably, now I say probably because unlike them, I'm willing to agree that the opposite is possible. Say, I'm willing to agree that the opposite is possible. I just want them to prove it with some more certainty. And I don't need 100% certainty. I just need some percentages. I just need some numbers. Tell me, like, what percentage of climate change are we? And here's the answer. I don't think they really know. I think all they really know from their computer models and the science is that the environment is changing, okay? I think they know that the world is changing and the environment is changing and that the world is going to continue to get warmer or cooler. It'll be a La Nina or an El Nino or something, and they have some ideas of these things. But I don't think they really know whether we're causing it or not and to what extent we are. But the politics of it, the power of it has supplanted the science of it. And so as a result, we're never going to get the exact answer because they would have to admit that it's all gobbledygook. And if they admit that it's gobbledygook, then they have to admit, why were we foisting this on you? Why were we manipulating you? It was embarrassing to learn all the things the government was doing that they claimed they weren't doing with the Snowden leaks. So it doesn't surprise me to learn that the government would be using this kind of thing as a bludgeon, and not just our government, the world governments, and it's sort of a de facto understanding. Al Gore came out with, after he invented the internet, which I appreciate because that's how we're broadcasting today, he came out with that book, An Inconvenient Truth. And Al Gore was instrumental in working in the right direction to convince people that carbon credits were necessary and global warming was a problem. And of course, at the same time, he created this whole company that buys and sells carbon credits and made himself very wealthy, more so than he already was, working off the very thing that he was advocating as he jetted around in his private jet from location to location and heated his house that was 5 times bigger than ours and, had energy costs that were 10 times an average families from Tennessee and all that sort of thing. Nonetheless, he's a great entrepreneur. We always say we want businessmen as politicians. Well, Al Gore did what any good business guy would do. He made a market, and then he sold that market. And it's kind of like deodorant. Nobody stunk before the invention of deodorant. Then they convinced everybody that they stink, and then everybody bought deodorant. Al Gore went out. He convinced the world that global warming was occurring. He convinced the world that global warming was going to become the norm, and that we needed to take drastic steps, and that there were big financial things that needed to be done. And somehow he had a company that just happened to meet those financial needs. So if you want to join in the conversation here on Rominger Radio, it's pretty simple. You just need to call in and jump on. It's 717-916-5189. Again, 916-5189. You jump on. You can talk live, 717-916-5189. And we'll go with it. Now, we're going to take a break here in a minute. And the way the break will work is I will shut down Spreaker, and that will stop the live broadcast and automatically archive the old show. And then we'll start the second hour and get it rolling. So if we go off the air, just remember we'll be back up in a couple of minutes. Down the road, if you have a business and you want to fill that time with a commercial, we'd always be happy to talk with you and throw a commercial in there as well. That can't be too hard to do, I would imagine. And I'm not sure. I'm not exactly sure how we'll do it, but be happy to work with you on that. Again, Karl Rominger here. Go to karlrominger.com for a little more information about the show, who I am, and what's going on. It's 6:55 now. We'll come back about 7:04. All right, guys, I will see you in a minute.